Tonight at 10, the BBC learns the Prime Minister is considering weakening some of the government's key green commitments in what will be a major policy shift. There could be changes on cars and on gas boilers, although the target of net zero carbon emissions by 2050 will stay. We'll be exploring the implications of these significant changes with our climate editor, Justin Rolat, and our political editor, Chris Mason. Hospitals in England are braced for tomorrow's strike, the first ever by both junior doctors and consultants. A special report from the small Indian state of Manipur, where brutal ethnic violence has divided communities and shattered lives.
It feels extremely tense. It feels like things could erupt very quickly, even with the slightest spark.
And Manchester City begin the defence of their Champions League title.
On BBC London, 1,000 officers suspended or on restricted duties in an effort to clean up the Met. And find out which London building is getting a special blue plaque.
Good evening. In a potential major policy shift, the Prime Minister is considering watering down some of the government's main environmental commitments. Rishi Sunak confirmed tonight that he wants to be honest about costs and trade-offs. Discussions are ongoing ahead of a speech in the coming days. Mr. Sunak said the biggest commitment to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050 won't be abandoned. But the BBC has learned that some long-standing commitments are under threat. They include delaying a ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2030 to 2035. The plan to phase out the installation of gas boilers by 2035 could be weakened, with only 80% phased out by then. And homeowners and landlords could be told there'll be no new energy efficiency regulations on homes. Our political editor, Chris Mason, reports.
Within the Conservative Party in recent months, a fuming row. A cost of living squeeze, but extra costs feared for families to meet green targets, long-term promises, short-term political pressures. And then, this moment.
13,965.
In the London suburbs, a Tory by-election win this summer when many expected defeat. And the key issue? A costly clampdown on dirty vehicles imposed by the capital's Labour mayor, an idea the Conservatives opposed. Cutting carbon matters, the Prime Minister has long argued, but a balance has to be struck.
I'm committed to net zero, of course I am, but we're going to do that in a pragmatic and a proportionate way without unnecessarily adding costs and burdens to families, particularly at a time like now when the cost of living is a challenge for people with inflation where it is.
Let me explain how and why we are reporting this now, what we know and what we don't know. What we do know is the Prime Minister really wishes this had not leaked. He has lost control of the choreography of his announcement. What I can tell you is that Downing Street had asked government departments to consider delaying, watering down or not committing to 8 environmentally related themes. We've reported a few already. Let me read a few more. No new taxes to discourage flying. No policies to change people's diet. And no measures to encourage carpooling. What we don't know yet is, having considered these ideas, is exactly which ones he actually commits to. In New York this week, as world leaders gather at the United Nations, intense debate too about climate change and what to do about it. Among those there, this Conservative MP, who led a review into the government's approach to net zero.
This is going to be an economic disaster. Actually, we are missing out already. We see the United States, where I'm here at New York Climate Week, actually turbocharging their efforts towards a green industrial revolution. Yet why do we want to fall behind?
Did your heart sink when you heard about this?
We still have a couple of hours and days in which maybe the Prime Minister might want to change his mind. So hopefully, if he listens to this programme tonight, he'll reconsider.
Well, thank you very much.
But some Conservatives and others have long campaigned for just this kind of policy shift. Here was the last Prime Minister just yesterday.
We should, as many other Western countries are already doing, delay implementing net zero commitments such as the ban on new petrol and diesel vehicles from 2030. Other environmental regulations, which are hiking the cost of living, like enforcing the replacement of gas and oil boilers, should also be abandoned.
Tonight, Labour said,
this is an absolute farce. This is absolutely no way to run a country. Late night policy statements from the Downing Street bunker, as ever, driven by the absolute chaos within the Conservative Party, with a weak Conservative Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
But there was no commitment from Labour to restore any targets that had dropped. A leak within government and a huge row boiling over, more than ever.
Well, in a moment, we'll speak to Chris about what all this means. But first, our climate editor, Justin Rowlatt, is here with me. What impact could these changes have, Justin?
Well, I've got to repeat, we don't know what's coming. But Mr Sunak is saying he's going to stick to the 2050 net zero target. Now, that essentially means what he's saying is we're going to kick all these carbon cuts down the road. If we don't cut carbon now, we're going to have to cut carbon more in the future. And there's another argument that making these changes now, switching to electric vehicles, heat pumps, making our homes more efficient, is good for the country. We heard it from Chris Skidmore there. It's a chance for the UK to lead, potentially, in all these technologies that the whole world is going to want in future. I was just talking to a senior figure in the car industry. He says most car companies want the UK to stick to its 2030 ban on pure petrol and diesel cars. Think about it. They are spending hundreds of millions of pounds retooling one of Britain's biggest industries, and they want there to be a market for their products. Now, it's also reputationally been good for the country. The UK really has led the world on cutting carbon, and that's given the country diplomatic heft. Roll back on green commitments now, and that leadership could be lost. And finally, the reason the UK has had this leading role on climate is because there's been a consensus between all the main parties on the importance of tackling climate change. This move could breach that consensus and potentially politicise tackling climate change.
OK, Justin, thank you very much. Chris, in Westminster, that point that Justin makes there, what is the political calculation here?
Firstly, Rita, this evening, governments hate it when they lose control of what they're planning to say and when there are leaks. And that's precisely what's happened with what we have revealed tonight. Usually when there are leaks in government, ministers say we don't comment on leaks, and yet tonight a written statement from the Prime Minister effectively acknowledging what we are reporting, saying that he is committed to net zero, but insisting that there has to be an honesty about the costs and the trade-offs, and an implication there that others have not been. Now, you know, there are folk around Rishi Sunak who have long wanted him to demonstrate in public what they see as the real Rishi Sunak, not a politician managing crises, political or pandemic, but setting out what he really believes and what they think is a balanced and pragmatic approach. Where we stand tonight, though, is a reignited row about the politics of climate. It'll provoke anger and controversy within the Conservative Party, around Parliament and beyond. Just the kind of thing that a Prime Minister who is in a hole in the polls needs to do.
Chris, thank you very much. Chris Mason reporting there, and thank you too to Justin Rowlatt. The father, stepmother and uncle of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif have appeared at the Old Bailey and told they'll stand trial next September for murder and causing or allowing the death of a child. Our correspondent Daniel Sanford joins us now from outside the Old Bailey. What did we learn today, Daniel?
Well, Rita, the case of the death of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif is now going through the Crown Court system. She was found dead almost 6 weeks ago at her family home in Woking in the early hours of the 10th of August. The 3 adults who lived with her, her father, her stepmother and uncle, all left the country the day before. Well, last Wednesday, Irfan Sharif, Beenish Batul and Faisal Malik all returned to the UK, and they've all been charged with murder and also causing or allowing the death of the child. They all appeared by video link for today's bail hearing, and in the hearing we heard new details about the extent of the injuries that Sarah Sharif had suffered. The prosecution talked about a constellation of healed and healing injuries, including a broken collarbone, multiple rib fractures to the front and rear, bruising to her torso and her limbs, and a brain hemorrhage. The police have previously talked about multiple injuries sustained over an extended period period of time. Judge Mark Lucroft KC told the three that they would remain in prison until their trial preparation hearing on the 1st of December. To give you some idea, the trial is currently scheduled for September, which shows you the state of the court system at the moment.
Daniel, thank you. A damning report on the mistreatment of detainees at an immigration removal centre has recommended that no one should be held for more than 28 days while awaiting deportation. Currently, there is no time limit. The report is the result of a public inquiry triggered by a BBC documentary, a Panorama documentary in 2017, which investigated the mistreatment of men held at Brook House near Gatwick Airport. The report found a toxic culture among staff and that it was a place of stress and distress. Tom Simons reports.
When a young custody officer working in Britain's immigration system agreed to go undercover for the BBC.
My name's Callum Tully. 2 years ago, I was just another lad trying to work out what to do with the rest of my life.
He had no idea that his journalism would result in a highly critical report by a public inquiry.
Then I got a job here, at a place you've probably never heard of, Brook House.
Where people are detained before being deported. Callum obtained footage of incidents like this.
Don't do it, mate.
An Egyptian detainee with mental health problems held to the ground by the neck by a custody officer. Inhuman and degrading treatment, the inquiry found. And this former detainee in Brook House at the time said the culture was abusive.
You know, I was terrified. That place was treating you like animals. They'll try and manhandle you by putting handcuffs on you, or a lot of officers will come and ram you down and put you to the ground. Try to get everyone locked up, then come for you physically and aggressively. Making slight comments, you black monkey, why are you doing here? Go back to your country, go back to where you're from.
The inquiry concluded the human rights of detainees were repeatedly violated during a 5-month period, and this was one of the reasons.
The use of force approach is based on a prison model, and immigration detainees are not prisoners, so it's completely inappropriate. And I found evidence of misuse of dangerous techniques being used, of inappropriate and excessive use of force. I'm not the first person to say that a 28-day time limit is needed. I think the evidence showed that the levels of distress, the anxiety, the uncertainty are very real for people in an environment such as Brook House.
But the government is likely to detain more people as it tries to stop the boats. The Home Secretary didn't respond to the call for a limit today. She said the government takes the welfare and safety of those we detain very seriously and has made significant improvements to immigration detention. We will carefully consider the findings of this inquiry in its detailed report. A report which details 19 abusive incidents, which have also left their mark on Callum Tully.
You know, I was in the room for the majority of those wearing a secret camera, and although it was incredibly hard to witness those cases of abuse, I took some comfort knowing that this stuff would be broadcast at some point and people would see these cases of abuse for what they were.
The inquiry wouldn't have happened without him. It's asked the government to respond within 6 months. Tom Simons, BBC News.
For the first time in the history of the NHS, junior doctors and consultants in England will tomorrow strike together over their pay dispute with the government. The consultants began their 2-day walkout today. Emergency care will be covered throughout, but some cancer care, for example, is affected. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
It's the first big surgery I've had, so it took some getting used to. It's all the things that you can't initially do when you've had surgery.
Today, Charlie is at the hospital discussing her breast cancer treatment. She's had surgery and now there are regular scans, but previous appointments have been affected by doctors' strikes.
I had a 30-day wait between having a scan and receiving the results of the scan, which, as you can imagine, is psychologically very difficult. There's a lot of anxiety in the lead up to a scan, but also in the lead up to getting results.
Charlie supports the doctor's right to strike, but is concerned if the dispute runs on for some time.
That's really difficult as a patient, you know, having increased anxiety from delays, having anxiety around your childcare and life admin, and the thought of this industrial action continuing or even increasing is really, really worrying.
At this major London cancer centre, 100 appointments and 30 operations have been cancelled because of strikes this week.
The biggest impact is on the surgery for our cancer patients, and although this is what you would term planned elective care, clearly it's essential that these patients are able to have the surgery for their cancer within a timely fashion.
So how have you been?
Very well, actually, yeah.
But urgent cancer care has continued. Zafia has come in today for her immunotherapy treatment.
I'm very happy that all my treatments proceeded without any interruption. I don't know whether I'm happy about the consultants going on strike, but I know that my treatment here and the oncologists I've been seeing have not, and that therefore I haven't been impacted by it at all.
With no sign of the pay row being resolved and winter approaching, hospital managers are more worried.
We're in no doubt that harm will be coming to patients as a consequence of the repeated cumulative industrial action that's gone on for so long.
Tomorrow sees a joint walkout by consultants and junior doctors and a new chapter in this bitter dispute. Hospitals are braced now for what they see as the most difficult day of this long-running dispute, with this unprecedented joint walkout of junior doctors and consultants, leaving only Christmas Day cover for the most urgent cases. And hospital bosses are even more worried about 3 days of these joint walkouts in early October, no doubt leaving thousands of patients with cancelled operations and appointments. Now, there have been some very preliminary talks between government officials and the British Medical Association, but no sign of any progress right now. In fact, the day has ended with acrimonious exchanges between the two sides.
Hugh,
Reeta.
thank you. Hugh Pym reporting. Birmingham City Council is to be run by officials sent in by the government after it effectively declared itself bankrupt. Britain's largest local authority is facing a bill of hundreds of millions of pounds for spiralling equal pay claims and failures over a new IT system. Birmingham is the latest in a number of local authorities that have declared they can't balance the books over the last couple of years. Phil Mackey reports.
This community centre used to be run by Birmingham City Council, but they had to let it go during the last big round of cuts. It's still here and thriving. This morning it was the parent and toddler group's turn. However, the community association that runs it still gets council money and is worried that it'll be taken away.
We've supported local residents with warm spaces over the cost of living crisis, food hampers, things like that. A lot of that has been funded through council initiatives. Cost of living is still going to be an issue for people with less resources in the council, that actually local residents are going to be hit really hard.
And most of the people who come here say things have got worse. Jade lives in a council house with her daughter and disabled mum.
You could see how it's sort of gone downhill, if you like, over a period of time. Like, they try and, you know, sort of make it better and stuff like that, but you can see that we are struggling as a city.
Now the government says it's appointing commissioners to take over.
For years now, the city has suffered as the council has failed to grip underperformance. Poor leadership, weak governance, woeful mismanagement of employee relations and ineffective service delivery have harmed the city.
Clearly we have challenges here in Birmingham that we need to address, not least stabilising the finances of this council and delivering the decent services that the people of this city need and deserve, and that's what we'll be working with them to do.
Critics say the council's only got itself to blame. It's wasted £100 million on a botched IT system, and it still owes £760 million in equal pay claims from women who were paid less than men on the same grade. This is the men's shed, a space for older men to come for company and support. It's self-sufficient now, but wouldn't be here without council funding.
It'll mean that new sheds won't be started up unless there's a commercial company possibly that's prepared to back them. There have been some, such where a company has decided to give a start-up grant for sheds. They're few and far between though.
It's barely a year since Birmingham was on a high when it hosted the Commonwealth Games. Now its golden years seem far behind, and the city will have to reflect on a future of more council tax and fewer services. Phil Mackey, BBC News, Birmingham.
The state of Manipur in the northeast of India has been rocked by ethnic violence since May, in a conflict marked by brutal murders and sexual crimes against women. The fighting is between the majority Meitei and minority Kuki communities, and it's left more than 200 dead. The state is deeply divided, and amid claims that the government has been slow to step in, civilians are taking matters into their own hands. This report by Yogita Limai contains some distressing details.
The road that divides a people who used to live peacefully together now feels like a heavily militarized border between countries at war. We crossed 7 checkpoints run by security forces, traveling between 2 communities in a single state, completely separated since ethnic violence in May. On both sides, we couldn't pass without permission from locals. One sign that people are taking matters into their own hands. This is another, a bunker run by civilians. These are men from the Kuki minority who live in Manipur's hills. Their guns aimed at an opposing bunker of the Meitei majority who live in the valley. Kakam, as he wants to be called, is a labourer.
We are compelled to pick up arms to defend ourselves. We don't want violence, but we don't fully trust that the security forces will be able to protect us.
The men who are in this bunker were civilians doing ordinary jobs like farming or keeping a shop. Now the words that you hear are words that you hear during war. For example, this is being referred to as a front line. What's beyond this is being referred to as a buffer zone or no man's land. And it feels extremely tense. It feels like things could erupt very quickly, even with the slightest spark. The conflict that broke out 4 months ago descended from tensions over quotas in education and jobs, land rights and political power. But the scale was unexpected. In the first few days, the dead were overwhelmingly from the Kuki minority. They still account for 2/3 of all casualties. The violence was savage. This video shows 2 Kuki women paraded naked. One of them allegedly gang-raped by the same mob. Her father and brother killed. We spoke to her mother. The family can't be identified according to Indian laws on rape.
My husband's arms were slashed with knives. My 19-year-old son was brutally beaten with rods. When I watched the video of what was done to my daughter, it made me want to die.
Since the first wave of violence, the killings continue. Kumathik barely sleeps or eats since his son's death. This family's words almost unbearable to hear. But Abraham wants everyone to know what they've been through. He tells us his brother David was tortured and killed by Meitei men in July. And a video of his severed head placed on a fence surfaced a day later.
It is extremely painful. I don't even keep his photos on my phone, because when I see them, I think of disturbing things.
We travelled out of the Kuki areas. At the end of each journey, stories that explain how the divide became so deep so quickly. This is a Meitei home in mourning. Silbia Sagulsem tells us her husband Naleba went missing near a Kuki area in July. A day later, this video emerged of him kneeling on the floor with a bloodied face. Another one shows him being shot dead. His family believes he was killed by Kuki men. These are his children.
It's really hard for me to accept he's gone. My elder son keeps asking where he is. My husband was a good man.
Tens of thousands are displaced in their own state, too afraid to return home. No dialogue yet between the two sides. People from both sides of the conflict are expecting Prime Minister Narendra Modi's national government to step in and resolve the crisis. They say they're disappointed that despite the severity of the violence, for months he didn't speak about it, and they say even now there are no concrete steps being taken on the ground. This is a Mai Tai bunker facing cookies in the hills. The number of armed civilians we've seen on both sides is striking. Most first held a weapon just a few months ago. The government says peace is returning. We found a conflict that continues to erupt. Yogita Lamai, BBC News, Manipur.
Here, data in a landmark study into the impact of puberty blockers, which was used to justify lowering the age at which they could be offered on the NHS, has been reanalysed with significant new findings. Puberty blockers are drugs taken by children who say they are transgender. The original conclusion had been that the drugs had no impact on mental health, but the reanalysis shows significant changes to mental health, for better and for worse. Newsnight's Hannah Barnes reports.
Using drugs to stop children going through puberty is one of the most polarising issues of our time. There's a lack of robust evidence around their use to treat gender distress. But now one of the few studies looking at their impact has been reanalysed. The 2011 study of 44 12 to 15-year-olds, carried out by UCLH and the Tavistock's Gender Identity Development Service, or GIDS, found there'd been no changes in the well-being of those children. No benefit, no harm. The study used scores from parent and child questionnaires that assess children's behavioural and emotional problems. The finding of no change was based on averaging the scores for all participants.
In this situation, the mean is essentially meaningless, because if you've got 44 young people, let's say, and let's say over a period of time, 11 do extremely well on the puberty blocker. 11 do quite well, 11 do extremely badly, and 11 do quite badly, and you make an average, you get, oh, no change.
Together with Professor Susan McPherson from Essex University, David Friedman has reanalysed the study's raw data, this time exploring changes at an individual level. The work isn't peer-reviewed yet, but found that after 12 months of puberty blocker injections, the majority of children saw their mental health significantly impacted, for both good and bad. 34% had deteriorated, 29% had improved. 37% showed no change. We can't say that these changes in well-being were caused by being on the puberty blockers because of the way the study was designed, without a control group. Plus, it's a small study of just 44 young people. But despite these limitations, this new analysis raises important questions.
It may well be that there are children who will benefit from being on the puberty blockers, but there are children who might be harmed.
The two NHS trusts behind the study said they welcomed new evidence around how to support these young people, and this new analysis will now be considered along with an up-to-date evidence review by those making recommendations for new gender identity services for children. Hannah Barnes, BBC News.
And there's more from Hannah on Newsnight on BBC Two, and that's in a few minutes' time. 3 British teams were playing tonight in the Champions League, including Newcastle's first match in Europe's top tier in 20 years. Joe Wilson was watching all the action.
Here's what it's for, all that Saudi Arabian investment to get Newcastle back among Europe's elite. In Milan against one of the most successful European teams there's ever been. Here we go, Rafael Leao. AC Milan found many ways not to score. This was the most elaborate. After 94 minutes mainly defending, Newcastle were here. Well, 0-0, a point towards the dream. Here's Mike Summerby of Manchester City past with the big trophy. City defending champions. Look carefully at Osman Bakari of Red Star Belgrade. Video replays analysed, and he was onside. The joy lasted until City's equaliser. This finish was exquisite from Alvarez. Next, an embarrassing moment for Red Star's goalkeeper, the most popular glazer in Manchester. 3-1 was the final score. It was a frustrating evening for Celtic in Rotterdam. This was their second red card. Yep, for that. This was the second goal Feyenoord scored against them. 2-0 it finished. The manager is back to take on Europe. He has time to think about it. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Sarah Keith Lucas with a lovely double rainbow behind you.
Yeah, absolutely, Rita. We've had a bit of sunshine and some showers, so certainly the recipe for rainbows out there today. But there is going to be more wet weather on the cards over the next few days, and things are going to turn increasingly blustery as well. But this was the view this afternoon where we did see the skies brighten in Stades in North Yorkshire. But over the next 24 to 48 hours, really, we've got the remnants of an ex-hurricane moving our way. So that's bringing those strong winds and some pretty torrential downpours at times. So the weather could be causing us a bit of disruption. Here's that area of low pressure moving in with its trailing weather front that sweeps slowly eastwards. We're going to be seeing the rain through Scotland, Northern Ireland as well over the next few hours. And as we head through into the early hours of Wednesday morning, it'll be sitting across northern England down towards the southwest as well. So temperatures on the mild side for most of us, the mid-teens, but through the day tomorrow, that band of heavy rain with squally winds just pushes its way gradually further eastwards. So we're going to be seeing gusts up to about 60 miles per hour around coastal parts of Wales through the morning. Blustery too for East Anglia and for the southeast. The winds through the morning gusting about 40 to 50 miles per hour through parts of western Scotland with a return to sunshine and blustery showers. But the winds strengthen here further into the afternoon, so 60 miles per hour or more. And those blustery winds reach the southeast of England with some really slow moving and torrential downpours. Could be the odd rumble of thunder in some of those heavy showers. Temperatures high teens, possibly low 20s. Head through into Thursday then, that main weather front clears slowly towards the east. So clearer skies, a colder night. In fact, temperatures for many of us getting down into single figures first thing on Thursday. But Thursday brings us another blustery day in the north. Gales possible for Northern Ireland and Scotland, but slightly lighter winds and brighter conditions by Thursday for England and Wales. Rita.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And that is tonight's BBC News at 10. Newsnight with Kirsty has just started over on BBC Two and here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. From our colleagues, from the 10 o'clock team, it's good night.